الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. So tonight inshallah ta'ala we'll continue discussing the book that we have been discussing regarding preparation for Ramadan, and that book, it is titled Umdatu Saalik wa Umdatu Nasik, and it is written by Ibn Naqib al-Misri, one of the ulama of the Shafi'iyah, who have written this matin regarding matters relating to fiqh. So we've been discussing in particular what he mentioned here regarding some of the masahil or some of the matters that relates to ahkam al-Ramadan. So inshallah ta'ala we'll pick up from where we had stopped in the last session, and we have started discussing where he mentioned those things that nullifies one fast, so mufsidat as-sawm. So those acts or those things, if done, then a person siyam is considered to be nullified, or also one can look at it as those things that one should avoid while fasting. So another way of looking at things are those things that one should avoid while fasting. So he mentioned several matters that he mentioned. He mentioned akl wa shurb, one ista'at wa itaqan aw sabbal fi udunayhi wa wasala dimaghuhu aw adkhal asba'an aw ghayruhu fi dubri aw qubulaha wa rawaha ma yubdi indahu al-aqd. Then he discussed all these matters that he mentioned regarding of the one that he mentioned, أو جامع أو تقية أو جامع أو باشر فيما دون الفرج فأنزل أو استمناء فأنزل أو بالغ في المضمضة واستنشاق ونزل جوفه. So he mentioned all these things that discuss concerning those acts that can nullify one's siyam, or things that one should avoid in siyam. So you can start make things more, which one others mention what is the more common of those things that are known regarding those acts that nullify one's siyam, or might add a few things related to them. So of the thing that he mentioned, certain type of taking of certain medication, putting things up through one anus and the likes. Then, so as for the things that we had started with regarding eating and drinking, as we had mentioned before, that of those things that nullify one's siyam, and that is taken that by way of the person doing so amdan. So the person who drink or eats amdan, then it's nullified the person fast, and we discussed that previously. Then we mentioned in the case of the person who may eat or drink intentionally while fasting, his fast is considered to be invalid, and what to be done is qada. That jumhur of the ulama, they take that position, a person that he should make al-qada for that matter, which he make up the day that was missed. After the discussion, does he make kafara? Then they mention no, there's no kafara to be done for the person who ate or drank intention in their siyam. Then of the things that we had stated, also the person who did or may have eat or drink unintentionally, the person did so out of forgetfulness, that they forgot and they ate or drank something, then as we had mentioned in the hadith of the Prophet they mentioned man nasiya wa sa'im, that the one who eats or drink and is sa'im فَيَتِمْ صَوْمَهُ, then the person should complete his sawm. فَإِنَّمَا أَطْعَمَ اللَّهُ وَسَقَاهُ, that indeed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fed or gave him something to drink. So they mentioned from that hadith that it shows that the person, that if he was to fall in eat or drink and it was done out of forgetfulness, that then that person who was unmindful, forget that he was fasting, then what should be done is that the person that he stop eating, or if he's told, he stops doing what he's doing, and that the person also that he will still continue that day, and he does not make up that day after Ramadan. There's no qada, make up for that day after Ramadan. So whatever is in his mouth and he remembers, then he will spit it out. If he has something in his mouth of food or drink, and at that point he remembers that he is fasting, then he would spit that out, and he would still continue the fast for the rest of that day, and still consider to be a day that he fasted, and also he does not make it up after. So they mentioned that is the person who did so, they mentioned that the one who eat and amdan is the person that's ikhtiyaran, the person who did make that choice, made that decision that he wished to eat and drink, and he was aware of what he's doing, and that he knew then that's the person who falls into amdan. They discuss other things that we just kind of somewhat point them out quickly. That I mentioned that the person who may have things of like spit, riq, in his mouth, then that does not break his fast. So the person who may spit, may swallow his saliva, So the one who swallow his saliva, this does not nullify the person siyam. But I mentioned but they discuss between the ulama that another difference that a person may have food particles still in his mouth. He has food particles still in his mouth that if it was to be swallowed, does that nullify his fam? So he still has somewhat food particle in his mouth. What to be done? Of those who mention that if it's very minor, it doesn't nullify his siyam. If it's minor, it does not nullify his siyam. That's the qawl of al-ijma' between a'immat al-arba, that if it is minor, it does not nullify his siyam. But it's something which is more noticeable regarding what he has in his mouth. It's something that is, then they mention that khilaf, those who mention it does not, and those who take that it does nullify his siyam. So you have a khilaf, so the person, what is best for a person if he find that he has things in his mouth, food particles, that is still in his mouth while he's fasting, then he should spit it out and not to swallow it, not to spit it out and not to swallow it. They discuss concern a person that was to swallow things that has or eat of things that are not considered to be normal, such as the person eating paper or barks of trees and the like. So does this nullify the person's siyam? They mention yes. So the person was to eat of those which is said not normally eaten as food, but a person may chew and eat of these things, that a person have this crave for eating dirt. The person likes to eat a piece of trees, tissues, and the likes. Then these things, if they're eaten, then they nullify the person's siyam. They nullify the person siyam, and that's concerning, and that's a ittifaq between a'immat al-arba. So between al-Hanafiyya, Malikiyya, wa Shafi'iyya, wa al-Hanabila, that Jumhur of they said Salaf al-Khalaf takes that the person will eat of these things, it nullifies their siyam. So the person might have a piece of thread and he's eating it and swallow it nullifies siyam. So those are the things also that included in eating and drinking. The other thing that they mention, seeing that is more common in our is common also, the matter regarding the matter of shurb ad-dukhan. So the one who may smoke. So smoking while fasting. So while fasting, that Jumhur of the ulama take the position that this nullify the person's siyam. So al-Hanafiyya wa Malikiyya wa Shafi'iyya wa Hanabila, they take that the person who takes off this substance of smoking, that this nullify siyam. So the smoking today we said normal smoking, or they call vape. Is it vape? That thing also is the same thing. So that type of going into the person's body, then inhaling those things, then it nullifies the person's siyam. So normal cigarette, as they refer to them as, or the vaping that now some people do both of these things that they nullify the person's siyam. And they mention that a verse as shurb ad-dukhan, referred to as shurb ad-dukhan, where a person like is drinking, taking something into his body. So it nullifies the person as siyam. And that's the view of the ulama, a'immat al-arba. Other thing that he mentions that then he mentioned also of another matter that he mentioned the case of istimna, which is our istimna fa'anzil, that the person who involved in the act of causing themselves to release. So a form of masturbation, that type of act. So they mentioned that some put it into different categories regarding that a person is somewhat allowing themselves to be released while they're fasting. So they mentioned a person wants to do so, whether it is done with his hands or someone's hands, or whatever other way that a person may have that done. If the person release, then the person's siyam is invalid. So the person, if he release, whether through himself or through another person or another thing, then his siyam is invalid, and that's called Jumhur of the ulama, except for the Zahiriyya. So the Zahiriyya take the position that istimna, that they mention masturbation, the person releasing of themselves, that it doesn't nullify his siyam, as there's no clear text about it according to the Zahiriyya. So the Zahiriyya, they mentioned there's no text mentioned regarding this act in the Quran or Sunnah. So they said it does not nullify a person's siyam. But Jumhur of the ulama, they take the hadith of Abu Hurairah ta'ala anhu, where the Prophet ﷺ mentioned hadith al-Qudsi, where the Prophet mentioned, يقول الله عز وجل الصوم لي وأنا أجزي به يدع شهوته وأكله وشربه من أجلي. So that's another narration that mentioned that, as it mentioned, يدع شهوته. Then it mentioned أكله وشربه. It mentioned those three things. So they mentioned shahwatuhu, that is concerned a person involved in. They said, sexual acts. So the one who's involved in sexual acts, then that's the person who, that is what is intended or meant, which is a shahwa, the person relieving of themselves, the person sexually causes themselves to be released. Then I mentioned also of this, that even some of the ulama discuss next with this, if the person was to cause themselves, the person was to release by way of just mere kissing or hugging. So the person who may be hugging or kissing or touching of wife or husband while they are fasting, then that person, then they release. So they mentioned, so as for this matter, they said also that person consider that his fast is invalid. His fast is invalid. And for that person, he has to make up that day. So in those cases, then a person have to make up those days. So they mentioned about shahwa, yada shahwatuhu, the person leaving away is shahwa. So anything that caused the person to release, then that's included in shahwa, except as they mentioned, except in the case the person have ihtilam, where the person have like a wet dream. So the person just having a sleeping and through their sleep while fasting, that they were to have a wet dream, then this does not nullify the person's siyam. So they make ghusl and they'll continue for the rest of the day. So in the case of a wet dream, this does not nullify the person's siyam. Rather, the person that is sawm is still valid, and the person, he takes ghusl and he continue fasting for the rest of the day. And that's an ijma' between the ulama. That's an ijma' between the ulama. As for the next dimension, al-madhi, which is the person who has somewhat maybe sexually aroused by maybe, so sexually aroused of that, so the person have this discharge, but it's not semen, it's madhi. So the person like sexually aroused, but by maybe looking or seeing something. But they mention if, and then so the person have that discharge, they mention khuruj al-madhi fi sahim la yanqud al-wudu. Yankul as-sawm, oh yeah, yufsid as-sawm. So the person of madhi, release of madhi, then this does not nullify the person's siyam. Does not nullify the person's siyam. The person might be looking at a woman, or a woman looking at a man, they get sexually aroused, they have a type of that release, which is not many, it is madhi, then that does not nullify the person's siyam. That does not nullify the person's siyam. They make wudu, but they have to make wudu and continue fasting for the rest of the day. And that's the call taken by Riwayah and Ahmed, Ikhtiyar ibn Mundhir, San'ani, or Ibn Taymin of contemporaries, that madhi does not nullify the person's siyam. It is many that nullify the person's siyam. Many that nullify the person's siyam. So he mentioned, so those are those primary things that are discussed between the ulama of things that nullify the person's siyam. He mentioned al-qay, which is istisqa, al-qay, where of those things that are covered regarding things that nullify the person's siyam, istisqa, where a person like, throwing up, vomiting. What's the ruling of a person who vomits while fasting? That the ulama mentioned the person that if the person was to cause themselves to vomit, so they bring about a vomit upon themselves, then the ulama mentioned that if the person did so intentionally, then that person's siyam is invalid, and the person have to make up that day. So causing oneself to vomit, the person nullify his fast for that day, and it is upon him that he has to make qada for this day. He has to make qada for this particular day. And that's the call of, they said, ittifaq a'immat al-arba. So amongst the a'imma or the fuqaha al-arba of the Hanafiya, Malikiya, Shafi'iyya, and the Anabila, and Aksar al-ilm, that a person who intentionally cause themselves to bring up their vomit, then they break their fast. And also a hadith upon Ibn Umar anhuma, where he mentioned upon the Prophet ﷺ, قال من استسقى وصائم فعليه قضاء ومن ذره القي فليس عليه القضاء. Al-hadith. So in this hadith that is mentioned regarding the person who calls themselves to vomit, or the person who vomits, that it comes out on its own accord, then they mention that case where man istasqa wa sa'im, that the one who calls himself to vomit, then, and is fasting, فَعَلَيْهِ قَضَى, indicating that he has to make up that day, meaning that day is invalid. Then they mention وَمَنْ ذَرَهُ الْقَيْسِ, so if it comes out on his own accord, so it comes out on his own, without his will, then they mention فَعَلَيْهِ فَلَيْسَ عَلَيْهِ قَضَى. Then there's no qada alayhi. Bear in mind that that particular hadith is under the ulama who all the hadith to be daif. With that hadith, even though it is well-known hadith, then of the ulama who mentioned that that particular hadith, it is daif. It is not a sound, it's not a sound hadith, rather it's a weak hadith regarding the person who threw up this particular hadith. That is the hadith which is daif. So that hadith is mentioned as hadith to daif. That then they mentioned that, you know, that for them that so they mentioned that hadith is daif, but of others who have mentioned, so that's concerning that, but ittifaq between ai regarding that matter. So they mentioned that the person who it comes up on its own, there's nothing upon him, the person who causes it to come out, the vomit, then they mentioned that person that he has to make up that day because that day was considered to be invalid. Then I mentioned that the evidence more solicited than ijma. Also, there's an ijma between the ulama that a person who falls in the case of it was to come out on his, he caused himself to break his fast, to vomit, then it is considered and it is considered then it breaks his fast, as mentioned by Ibn Hazm, So those are the aqwal of those more renowned things that nullify the person's siyam. So they mentioned food, drink, the person vomiting, they were mentioned, and other things that relates to that. Then they mention matters regarding vomiting, that ijma, that it nullified the person's siyam, that it nullified the person as siyam. So they mentioned so the person who may kiss or touch, but the person then, if as long as there's no semen discharge and the person is okay, the person, then it is okay. So as we mentioned the hadith, man istasqa wa huwa sa'im fa'alayhi qada. As we mentioned that particular hadith under some discussion of some of the ulama authentic hadith, but others all the hadith to be daif. Others who all the hadith to be daif. But also you have a hadith of Abi Dar or Abi Darda, another hadith of Abi Darda, that also they can somewhat use to mention أن رسول الله عليه السلام قاء فأفطر. أن رسول الله عليه السلام قاء فأفطر. The Prophet عليه السلام, that he threw up, he vomited, and then he mentioned فأفطر, and then he broke his fast. And that particular hadith I mentioned in the Abu Dawud, in his Sunan, or also at Tirmidhi, in his Al-Jami', and the hadith of the ulama, amongst them Shaykh Muqbil, that all the hadith to be sahih. The ulama all the hadith to be sahih. So they mentioned that in also, but that even that hadith, even that said the hadith, it doesn't say it is something which is wajib, it does indicate it is something which is mashru', that it shows the permissibility, but it's to the extent of wajib, then a must, the person have to break his fast. I mentioned that the Prophet chose this not to do so, so this but not something which is wajib. But overall I mentioned that the ijma, that it is the one that is primarily used regarding this matter. And also Ibn Hajj, so that's concerning. So we have mentioned that Ibn Mundhir mentioned regarding vomiting also nullifies of one fast. Then as some of the ulama, they use a principle, amongst them Ibn Abbas, they mention al-fitr, that thing that nullifies a person fast, mimma dakhal is thing that enters into the person, walaysa mimma yakhruj. So Ibn Abbas, that he mentioned al-fitr, the thing that nullifies the person fast, mimma dakhal, the things that comes out, walaysa mimma yakhruj. So what enters, not what comes out. So he mentioned al-fitr mimma dakhal. So he mentioned that al-fitr is those things that enter, goes into the person, walaysa mimma yakhruj, and not things that comes out. And that athar in the al-Bayhaqi wa Ibn Abi Shayba with sahih. Then the next thing that is also discussed, we just add this, and next of those things that are covered regarding of those things that they consider as of those acts that nullify one's siyam or one should avoid while fast, they mention al-hijama. So of those, al-hijama. So al-hijama, you have some discussion between ulama, does it nullify the person's siyam or not? So you find a khilaf between the ulama, and the khilaf from past and still exists, that regarding this particular matter. So of the ulama, they take the hadith of Ibn Abbas anhuma, or they mention Anna Nabi alayhi salam ihtajam wa huwa sahim. The hadith of Ibn Abbas anhuma, where the Prophet alayhi salam that anhu, where he mentioned Anna Nabi alayhi salam ihtajam, the Prophet salam that he performed hijama wa huwa, or got hijama done wa huwa sa'im, and that he was fasting. And that hadith in the Bukhari. That hadith in the Bukhari. So they indicate from that hadith that they said from this hadith, it showed that it does not nullify one fast. As the Prophet said, that, and that's the view taken by majority of the ulama, that hijama, the person doing the act of cupping, that it does not, which is taking off the blood from the body, that it does not nullify the person's siyam, as the Prophet said in this case, had it done, perform upon him, and he was fasting. Then also you have hadith of ثابت بناني قال سئل أنس بن مالك أنس بن مالك رضي الله عنه أكنتم تكرهون الحجامة للصائم على عهد رسول الله على عهد النبي عليه السلام. So you mentioned that ثابت بناني, that they asked Anas bin Malik, was it of something that you dislike, or you mean the Sahaba, that you disliked hijama, cupping, while you were fasting during the time of the Prophet alayhi salam? فقال يعني أنس بن مالك قال لا إلا من أجل الضعف, that it was something that he said no, except for those people. It became something which was disliked regarding those people was due to weakness, or those people became physically weak. But I also find another group, that's the position taken by those who say it does not nullify your siyam. Then of the ulama that take the position that it does, that the one who does cupping, hijama, and also the one who perform it upon others, that both siyam is invalid. And they use the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, the hadith that I mentioned, the hadith of Thawban, and also the hadith of Shidad ibn Aus, the hadith of Shidad ibn Aus and the hadith of Thawban رضي عنهما قال أن النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام قال أفطر الحاجم والمحجوم, أفطر الحاجم والمحجوم, that the one who does cupping and the one who has it done upon them, that their siyam is invalid. And that particular hadith in the Abu Dawud, that hadith in the Abu Dawud, and the ulama a discussion regarding hadith of those who but of those who authenticate the hadith. So you have those hadith that are being discussed regarding concerning that matter, regarding cupping, does it nullify the person siyam or not? So they include the person that they said tabarru bid-dam, the person who cannot that they will give off blood. So blood donation will be included in those who say that the cupping nullifies one siyam. They will take the position that it nullifies one fast. As for those, which is jumhur, majority of the ulama, that take the position it does not, then they mention a person, it doesn't nullify his fast, but a person with it in large quantity or small quantity. But so that's concerning that discussion. So if the person maybe can avoid it, then that's better. If the person has to, because of doctor requests, due to medical reason, then the person does so, but also their fast is not considered to be invalid. Their fast is not considered to be invalid. Also, he mentioned regarding أوبال في المضمضة واستنشاق فنزل الجوف. Then he mentioned of those things concerned that there are also the things that discussed between ulama, that al-istinshaq wal-madmada, with the hadith more mentioned al-istinshaq. So he mentioned the person regarding fasting that be mindful regarding taking water into one's, when performing wudu, or taking water into one's mouth or into one's nose, just to be mindful. So he mentioned regarding concern, and the hadith of the Prophet Islam, hadith of Laqit ibn Sobra, where the Prophet mentioned, Balik fi istinshaq illa an takuna sa'iman. Balik fi istinshaq, that you should go to excess in istinshaq, sniffing water into the nose when you normally perform al-wudu, illa an takuna sa'iman, except when you're fasting. So go to extreme or in performing istinshaq, but except for the one who's fasting, except for the person who's fasting. So they mentioned that that particular hadith, that it shows that the person just be mindful when, as that can nullify Islam, that taking too much water into the nose and it goes into the system, into the stomach, then that can nullify the person's fast. So for the person to be mindful of that matter while performing al-wudu or al-ghusl while fasting, So those are the points that he mentioned, are some of the things that can be mentioned regarding what is said regarding those things that nullify the person as siyam. And of those general things that are mentioned, Then he mentioned, by stating the next dimension, ضابط al-fitr. Then he kind of somewhat mentioned ضابط al-fitr. Those things he referred to as ضابط al-fitr, mufattir. So ضابط al-mufattir, those things that nullify the person's siyam. So he mentioned that wusul, ain, thing that goes through the ain, وإن قلت من منفذ مفتوح إلى جوف والجماع وإنزال and مباشرة أو استمناء عالم بتحريم ذاكرا للصوم. So the general thing that he mentioned, that of those things regarding concerning that, the general points regarding as-siyam and those things that nullifies the person's siyam, he mentioned wusul al-ayn, things that can go through one's ayn. He mentioned وإن قل, even there's something which is a small amount, من منفذ مفتوح إلى جوف, and it goes into the system, it goes down into the person's stomach. Then he mentioned al-jima', according to mention al-jima', which is also of those things that intimacy, inzal, also the person regarding concerning sexual the person releasing of themselves, as we have discussed. Then he mentioned aliman bitahrim, that is aware that these things are not to be done, haram. Dhakiran is mindful and aware of this matter, lisawm, that is fasting. So that's concerned that he mentioned that. So the person who's alim bitahrim, that he knows that this thing is not to be done, but then still does it, and he's mindful of what he's doing, then this nullifies the person's siyam. So it's not considered to be that the person did it nasiyan, that he did out of forgetfulness. So he mentioned here ijma' or jima' as another of those acts that nullify the person as siyam. So he mentioned which on that matter, that al-jima', intimacy, of those things that nullify the person as siyam. You have different that they mentioned regarding concern the case that is that a person came to the Prophet ﷺ and told him that mentioned that hadith where the person came to the Prophet ﷺ, hadith in Bukhari Muslim, where the person came to the Prophet ﷺ and called that جاء رجل النبي عليه السلام فقال, that a person came to the Prophet ﷺ said, no, halaktu, I've bring upon myself destruction. So the Prophet said, ma ahlaka, what are the things that bring about your destruction? Then the person went on to explain, وَقَعْتُ عَلَى إِمْرَتِي فِي Ramadhan, that I had intimacy with my wife in Ramadan. Then the Prophet ﷺ can somewhat then tell a person what to be done in that case, concerning what to be done in that case by way of kafara. So these are referred to as kafara. So things of expiation to be done in the case the person fell into intimacy during Ramadan. The person had intimacy, penetration in Ramadan, what to be done. Ulama mentioned whether through al-qubur or dubur, whether through the back or the front. So the person entered through the front or through the back, then it's considered to be intimacy, and this rule applies. They mentioned that the Prophet mentioned an ta'atiq raqaba, that of those cases, al-tajid, do you find the ability to free a slave? Qala, the person said, no, I can't. So they mentioned that one, with jumhur of the ulama, that the kafara for a person who had intimacy, sexual intimacy, while fasting, then what is to be done by way of kafara, the expiation, is done in a sequence or the order. The first order is that a person, if he's able to free a slave, if not, he mentioned أن تصوم شهرين متتابعين, that a person, if he's able, that he fasts 2 consecutive months. So he fasts 2 consecutive months, which would be, so 2 consecutive, so when a person starts, he has to continue. And he's not allowed to stop unless for a valid reason. So the person who starts, he has to fast 2 consecutive months, From the time that he starts, he has to continue those days until the end. And he's only allowed to stop for a valid reason, then he continue on. But if the person wants to stop and break for no valid reason, then you have to start the entire process again. Then I mentioned قال, that the person that is unable to fast for 2 consecutive months. قال فهل تجد أن تطعم 60 مسكينة? Are you able to feed 60 poor people? So feeding of poor people, which would be the number of 60. Then the person said, La, is unable. So overall, ulama mentioned that these are the 3 things, are the things to be done regarding kafara. That one, freeing a slave, to emancipate a person. Second, the person to fast 2 consecutive months. And third, that the person that he feeds 60 individuals. So that's concerned those matters they discussed regarding the person who fall into a case like that. And then have a discussion regarding the person needs the day that he did the act, is that day to be added, to be done also. Then a khilaf between the ulama on that. Jumhur or Imma of the Imma, or that the person has to make up that day also. That they mention a person has to make up that day also that he did that he did that act in, plus the other things that were mentioned. So those are the main of those things that are mentioned regarding Siyam Ramadan, of Siyam Ramadan. Then he mentioned after then, and then he mentioned Wahiya, which he mentioned Wahiya et Raqaba al-Mu'mina, regarding the person who falls into intimacy. Then of the way to expiate this, the kafara, freeing a person, salimat min uyub, madarra bil kasb, then a person who is free from any form of fault. Wa in lam yajid, and if the person does not find the ability to free a person, fasiyam shahrain mutatabi'in, that he has to fast 2 consecutive months. Fa in lam yastati', if the person unable, fa it'am sittina miskina, then he has to feed 60 person, 50 people. فإن أجز, and if he's unable, فثبت في ذمته, then if he's unable to do any of those things, it remains something for him to do at some point. It remains as something that he has to fulfill whenever he is able to can fulfill one of those 3 things mentioned. So he mentioned that it doesn't just go away, it still remains upon the person to fulfill this kafara because of intimacy he had in Ramadan. Then he mentioned after this, as we had mentioned, the hadith of Abu Hurairah anhu regarding that matter. Then he mentioned ولا تجب على مدعوة كفارة. So the next discussion between the ulama, or what is mentioned here, that the lady, so you have the man who did the act, but then I mentioned then the lady, and they did it amdan, the lady that was done to the other person. Is there any kafara upon them? So is both to fulfill these kafara, or only one person is required? Then you have a khilaf, they mentioned لا تجب. According to the author here, he mentioned لا تجب على موطوعة kafara, that the woman that was involved, then she does not fulfill any of these kafara that are mentioned. And a khilaf between ulama, whether it is something that she was forced upon her without her choice or her will, or something that she also was a willing participant. If she was a willing participant, then so you have that discussion between ulama, whether she did it willingly or was a willing participant, or it was something that was placed upon the dimension. وَإِن فَعْلَهُ جَمِيعَ ذَلِكَ نَاسِيًا, that if the person did these things all that were mentioned before, نَاسِيًا, eating, drinking, intimacy, and all these other things, أو جائلا أو مكروها أو مقرأ أو غلبة القي أو أنزل الاحتلام أو أن فكر أو نذر أو أنزل الماء جوفه بمضمضة أو استنشاق بلا مبالغة أو جر الريق بما بقي من الطعام من خلل أصنام بعد تخليله وأجز أن مجه أو جم ريقه في فمه وابتله صرفا أو أخرجه على لسانه ثم رده وبلغه أو بعله أو أقتلع نخام من باطنه فلطفه أو طلح الفجر في فمه طعام فلطفه أو كان مجامعا نزأ في حال أو نام جميع النهار أو أغمي عليه فيه وأفاق لحظة منه لم يضره في جميع ذلك ويصح صومه. Then he mentioned these cases regarding a person who fell into these things and he was jahil or nasi or he was forced, or he mentioned a person that the vomit came out on his own, it came upon him, that the person who have ihtilam, that had a wet dream, or a person who by thinking or by looking, and the person have some form of discharge. Then also the person that al-madmada or istinshaq, or the person who that sniff water down in their mouth or gargle into their throat, bila mubalagha, and it was not done out of mubalagha. Then I mentioned or jarra ariq, or a person of saliva and the likes, or ta'am fi khall asnami, or a person of food particles in his mouth, ba'da takhlilihi wa ajza and majji, and he was unable to remove it. Or jam riqahu, or a person combined between his riq fi fami, and he combined riq in his fam, and all of these practices he mentioned. And then he mentioned that wa ughmiya, then he mentioned lam yadarruhu fi jami' dhalik wa yasah somu. All of these things do not nullify the person's siyam. According to him, all of these things does not nullify the person's siyam. Then he mentioned after this, فإذا أكل متخذا أنه ليل فبان أنه نهار. That they mention next matter regarding of those things that they discuss, that if the person was to believe that it was still the night, but then he became aware that it was the day. أو أكل ظانا غروب يعني الشمس واستمر بإشكال وجبت القضاء. Then they mention when أكل متخذا, that a person who ate أنه, and he thought it was June, it was still night, but then became clear that it was still that it was the daylight. Or a person eating, thinking person, or akala dhanan, that a person ate thinking that Maghrib has entered. Wastamar ishkalan wajabat and he still have doubts. Then I mentioned that all these cases you have to make up. So the person who ate at the wrong time, ate during the day, thinking it was night, or believing it was night, or a person who ate at the wrong time before Maghrib. Then I mentioned that in these cases the person has to make up that day, because the person, he ate during the daylight hours of Ramadan. He ate in the daylight hours of Ramadan, so the person has to make up that day. Then I mentioned وَإِنْ ظَنَّ أَنَّ الْفَجْرَ لَمْ يَطَّلَعْ فَأَكَلَ وَاسْتَمَرَ إِشْكَالٍ فَلَا قَضَى. Then I mentioned the next case regarding the opposite. If the person believed that it was still Fajr, that the person believes that Fajr hasn't yet, is not yet time, that Fajr is not yet in, that the time for Fajr is not yet in, فَأَكَلَ. So he ate, still believed there was still night, and that Fajr hasn't yet come in for him to stop eating, but then he ate, continue eating. Then I mentioned فَلَا قَضَى. Then the person does not make up for that day. The person, because they mentioned that it was still for him, that before Fajr, he thought it was still night, then Fajr, so for him, he does not make up that day. That I mean, وَإِن طَرَهَ فِي إِثْنَى نَهَارٍ جُنُونًا وَلَوْ فِي لَحْظَةٍ مِنْهُ أو استغرق نهاره بإغمام أو طرح عليه حيض أو نفاس بطلت الصوم. Then discuss the next matter, which is we have covered before regarding that regarding the case of the person who's majnoon, and the case of the woman that starts regarding her menstrual cycle, that it starts during the daylight hours, then her sawm is considered to be invalid. So at any point during the day that her cycle it starts, then her fast of that day is considered to be invalid. Even though she started fasting, but then her cycle came later on during the day, then that day is considered to be, she have to make up that day, and also that she does not complete the rest of the day fasting. Then I mentioned ويندب السحور وإن قل ولو بما وأفضل تأخيره ما لم يخف الصبح. Then he starts to discuss concerning the matter regarding of as-suhoor. So he has somewhat now covered most of the masail, or some of the masail, or what he mentions here, as to the thing that one should avoid and be careful while fasting. Things to avoid while fasting. So we have covered most of those points that he have mentioned here regarding the things to avoid while fasting. And also things that may be confusing, but regarding the person who may stop eating or start eating at the wrong time, or the person who continue to eat not knowing that Fajr is in, what is to be done in those cases and scenario. And also that the case of the, we have discussed regarding the Majnoon, that from the time the person gained sanity, come upon the person, then his siyam for that day is invalid, according to what he mentioned. And also the lady who starts her cycle, then from the time that it starts, her fasting for that day becomes invalid. Then I mentioned after this, when I mentioned that of those I said mandub acts of siyam, of the mandub acts of siyam, he mentioned here yandab as-suhur in qal walau bima, that as-suhur, that is encouraged regarding concerning taking of suhoor. So of those things that are encouraged, that they mention of taking of suhoor. And they mentioned that at least even some water, even if a small drink of water that the person should have while before fasting. So as suhoor, that one should take of the suhoor before fasting. The Prophet mentioned hadith where he stated in the hadith, where the hadith mentioned la yazal an-nas bi khair, that the people still remain upon goodness. Ma ajjalu, that's concerning al-fitr, sorry, that's concerning al-fitr. As he mentioned straight after, when he mentioned this straight after, they mentioned that the Prophet mentioned concerning the difference between us, al-farq baynana wa bayna al-yahud wa nasara, that as-suhoor, the difference between us and the Jew and the Christian is as-suhoor. So taking of the suhoor, of those things that distinguish between us and others. So the Prophet encouraged regarding the taking of the suhoor, the morning meal before fasting starts. So the person take a meal, which is drinking, he mentioned even just water, then that will suffice. Then he mentioned afdal. So after as-suhoor, he mentioned, which is, he mentioned al-afdal ta'jil al-fitr idha tahaqqaq al-ghurub. That the next of those things, he mentioned that if it is certain, the person is certain that the sun has set, it's time to break fast, then a person should do so immediately. So the person should hurry in breaking of his fast if the person is certain that the time has entered. And this from the hadith where the Prophet mentioned, where he stated concerning the hadith, where he stated, La yazal an-nas bi khair, that the people remain upon khair, ma ajjalu al-fitr, as long as they are hasty in breaking of their fast. So the Muslim are encouraged to break off their fast. And they mentioned that, he mentioned, yuftir ala tamarat witran, that a person break their fast on tamarat, on dates, witran, and use an odd number, so an odd amount, so 1, 3, 5, 7. So the person eat odd number of dates in breaking of his fast. If the person wants to eat even number, then his fast is still valid, and there's no harm in that. Is khilaf as-sunnah. So ideal, the person use odd number of dates in breaking the fast. فَإِنَّ لَمْ يَجِدْ, if the person doesn't, فَنَمَا, then if he does not find dates, then he use of water to break of his fast. Then he mentions here فَيَقَالْ وَيَقَالْ, and the thing to be said regarding the dua to be said upon breaking of one fast. They mention Allahumma laka sumtu wa ala rizqiq aftartu. That so you have those ahadith that are mentioned regarding several hadith that are mentioned regarding what to be said in breaking of the fast. What to be said in breaking of the fast. They mentioned that most of those hadith are daif. That most of the hadith that mention about what to be said when breaking of one fast, that the hadith that they're somewhat weak. So you have that discussion about the ulama who may all the hadith to be maqbool. But overall, the hadith that discuss about what to be said or the dua to be said in breaking off the fast, They mentioned those hadith, there's some kalam about those hadith, even though some of the ulama may take those hadith to be maqbool, mean the hadith is still authentic. But a discussion between the ulama regarding those that matter. So then he mentioned ويندب كثرة الجود وصلة الرحم, of those things that are, so he mentioned of the other things that are said to be يندب كثرة الجود وصلة الرحم, that of those things that are encouraged for the person who is fasting. So additional things that are said to be things that are encouraged for the person who is fasting. So he mentioned, so of those other things that are said to be encouraged acts while fasting, that one should be try to increase in these acts. He mentioned al-jud, which is method regarding being kind. So being kind while fasting, as the Prophet mentioned, كان أجود الناس وأجود ما يكون في رمضان. In the hadith, the Prophet they mentioned that the Prophet Islam that was the most kindest of people overall, and even more so in the month of Ramadan. Then he mentioned also Silat al-Rahim, that a person also try to maintain good family ties while fasting. Kathrat tilawa wal iqra, that also the person that try to read the Quran as much so that try to increase in the reading of the Quran during the month of Ramadan. So reading in general concerning the Quran wal iqra. Then I mentioned wal ittikaf, siyama ashar awakhir, and even so ittikaf, performing ittikaf in the month of Ramadan, so performing itikaf in the month of Ramadan. Then he mentioned siyama al-ashar awakhir, more so the last 10 nights, so the last 10 nights of Ramadan that I mentioned, and that is sometimes discussed separately. So the ulama regarding al-itikaf, that is discussed separately. That and also in this book also he mentioned al-itikaf as a separate chapter. So it is mentioned in general of those things that are encouraged in the month of Ramadan, or things that a person should pay attention to while fasting. So he mentioned them in general, but some of these matters that they mentioned separately, amongst them itikaf. So he mentioned itikaf more so in the last 10 nights of Ramadan, وأن يفطر الصوام ولو بما, and also try to offer other people something to break their fast, so offering others to break their fast. وتقديم الغسل جنابة, and also al-fajr, that the person with a state of janaba, that تقديم الغسل جنابة al-fajr, that for the person to in a state of janaba in the morning try to perform ghusl before al-fajr, try to perform their ghusl before al-fajr. Then I mentioned وترك al-ghiba wal-kadhib, also for the person to leave away things of al-ghiba, so things that are disliked. Tark, al-ghiba, biting of others, speaking about others in their absence, of things that they may disapprove of. Wal-kadhib, wal-fush, fil-qawl, wa-shahawat, wal-fas, wal-hijama, and also the person, so leaving away of these things. He mentioned al-ghiba, lying, speaking things that are unbefitting, to be spoken fil qawl, regarding things that one would say which is unbefitting, indecency. Wa shahawat, and leave away things of shahawat, it's unbefitting practice, indecency. And also al-fast wal hijama, which is the person that's not cupping and the like, is best to leave away those things. Wa in shutim, and of the person that you abused, if someone is abusing you, فَلْيَقُلْ, then the person said, إِنِّي صَاهِمْ, that I am a fasting person. So if you are being abused by others, then you should say, I'm a fasting person. As the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned regarding, in this particular case, as what to be said, إِنِّي صَائِمْ, that. Then also he mentioned of those things that he discussed, he mentioned, وَتَحْرُمْ الْقُبْلَ liman harakat shahwatuhu, and also the person who have like strong desire, that is best for him, it is not for him to kiss. So the person who is married, that not for him to kiss if his shahwa is very intense and strong. Wal wisal, and also the person, he mentioned also wisal, that which is the person that delay breaking of his fast. So the Prophet ﷺ times, he would delay breaking of his fast, and the Sahaba would do. So the ulama mentioned that the person should not delay breaking of his fast until the next until Fajr. But if he chooses to do so, he can do so, but it should not go until into the next day. It should not go into the next day. So they mentioned that al-wisal, so one should avoid, should is something which is disliked, or tuhram, not to be done, something which is haram, as he mentions here. إلا أن تناول في الليل شيء, except for the person that if in wisal, that a person during the night you have to take something, so can delay it, but not into the next day, not go into the next day. ولو شرب ما ولو جرعة عند سحر. And also I mentioned a person taking of the suhoor. So I mentioned that, as is mentioned before, that a person taking of suhoor, which is even if it's just a mouthful of water, even if it's a mouthful of water, فلا يحرم, that it is not haram, it is not haram. ويكره ذوق الطعام, that they mentioned also it is disliked for a person to taste of food, so it's not something which is haram. So the person is allowed, it is disliked, ذوق الطعام, for the person to taste of food in the mouth. So the person cooking and taste the food, it is something which is jaiz between the ulama, and he mentioned here dislike. وألق لا أدري ما هيش الألق والسواك بعد الزوال. Then he mentioned a siwak, which is بعد الزوال, with a person that can use of siwak. So a discussion between ulama regarding the use of siwak. So the ulama mentioned that it is allowed, some mention up to zawal, up until the sun is in the zenith, right before dhuhr, that one is allowed to do so. After, then of those who mention, no. Of those who mention a person regarding siwak, there are miswak, the use of siwak, which is the thing to clean off one teeth, the miswak, then one should not the miswak. So while fasting, it can be done, but I mentioned a person do it like in the morning. As for after midday, they mention no. After midday, they mention no. According to some others who mention it can be done all day. It can be done even after zawal. Then I mention kul, that the use of kul, that the eye thing they put on their eyes. Wa istihmam, and also the person washing, going to the hammam is allowed for the person to do so. So they show the concern of the person taking off bath, that the person, that is something which is allowed. So taking off a bath, washing of oneself, it is something which is allowed in the sense of alcohol, which is the forms of beautification the person put on their eyes. Then also that is allowed to be done. So those things are things that are allowed for the person that is fasting. They mention وَيُقْرَأ لِكُلِّ أَحَدٍ صَمْتٍ يَوْمٍ إِلَى اللَّيْلِ. And also he mentioned of those things that are disliked, that a person should remain or not speak the entire day. So the person can go in silent, not speaking all day. Then this is something which is, he mentioned that yukra is this, like the person go fasting and he's not speaking. He's not speaking to anyone and not saying anything the entire day. Then this is disliked to be done. Then I mentioned وَمَنْ لَزِمَهُ الْقَضَى, that one who's upon him, is must upon him that he has to make up shay min Ramadan, anything from Ramadan. So the person who fell into an act that requires him or her to make up for Ramadan, due to for whatever reason may be, that I mentioned nudib and yaqdiyahu mutabi'an ala four, that the person have to make up days. Then I mentioned that one, it is preferred, it is mandub, preferred, more recommended, that a person he do so mutabi'an, that he should do so, that all of them together. So doing them continuously or one after another. So simultaneous, everything being done together. He mentioned, and as quick as possible. He mentioned that is preferred. So making up, do it as quick as possible and do those days as quick as possible and also together. So they mentioned, وَلَا يَجُوزْ أَن يُؤَخِّرْ الْقَضَاء إِلَى رَمَضَانَ آخِرْ بِغَيْرِ عُذْرٍ. The next matter he mentions is that the person who have days to make up, then it is لا يجوز, is not allowed for a person to delay making up until the next Ramadan without a valid reason. So the person who has somewhat delayed making up from what he missed from last Ramadan, and the present Ramadan is upon him, then that becomes, and he has no excuse. This is something which is haram. It is haram upon that person to fall into that practice or that act. وَإِنْ أَخَّرَهُ, if it is delayed, Then I mentioned a person, it did catch up with him the next Ramadan. He delayed it until his qada was not completed, and the following Ramadan is upon him or her. He mentioned, lazimahu mal qada, is upon him with the days that he has to make up, and kulli yawm mud. So you make up the days that you still have behind, that you still have remaining to be made up, and for each day of the mention, and kulli yawm mud min ta'am, that a person also have to feed a poor person amount of mud for each day. So for the person who had days to make up, they delayed, and the next without any valid reason, and the following Ramadan, it upon them, the following Ramadan is present, then the person have to do two things. He still have those days that he missed to make up, him or her. And second, for each day that they still have to make up, when they fast that day, then also they have to feed a poor person for that day also. So two things to be done: make up the day, and also mud. That he has to feed a person for each day. When akhar Ramadan, that he was to make up, he has 2 Ramadan that he also pile up. So you have being somewhat complacent, where now he has 2 Ramadan that he has delayed. He had 1, he delayed, another came, he still delayed things. Then I mentioned, he has to make up all those days, but also muddan. But then the amount of people that, the amount of food to be given to the poor person is doubled. From al-mud to 2 mud have to be made up. وهكذا يتكرر بتكرر السنين. And every year that you miss what you had before, you keep piling it up, then everything increase. So if you miss 3 Ramadan, then you have to make up those days for those 3 years, and also that you have to pray for each person. They becomes 3 mud to be done. 3 mud to be done. So he mentioned, as you miss, as it increase, also the amount increase. وَمَنْ مَاتَ وَعَلَيْهِ صَوْمٌ فَتَمَكَّنْ مِنْ فِعْلِهِ, that a person who passed away and he had the ability to fast, عُطْئِمْ أَنْهُ أَنْ كُلِّ يَوْمٍ مُدْ طَعَامٍ. So the person who died, passed away, and the person had the ability to fast, but didn't, then it mentioned عُطْئِمْ أَنْهُ أَنْ كُلِّ يَوْمٍ مُدْ طَعَامٍ. Then for each day, then a person is fed on his behalf. A person is fed on his behalf. So that's what he mentioned regarding these ahkam, regarding these matters, regarding things to avoid while fasting. And he mentioned primarily food, drink, also intimacy, regarding things that sometimes occur regarding the person might have saliva or nukhama in his mouth, what to be done in those cases. Then he also discussed what's the dhabit, what's considered to be the guideline in deciding the person who to break his fast. He mentioned that, so of those things, he mentioned that thing that goes inside the person by way of his ayn or other places. Then also al-jima, intimacy, the person who release himself. So he mentioned a person who release himself, istimna, that when it is done by the person himself to whatever way, or the person, someone else did on their behalf or for them, then the person have to make up that day. So the person make up that day, and that day is considered to be invalid. We said the Zahiriyya says it doesn't. The Zahiriyya mentioned that the person release themselves by way of masturbation, it does not nullify the person's siyam, according to the Zahiriyya. But others, Imat al-Arba says otherwise. And also the person that these rules apply, that is the person who is aware of what is haram while fasting, and he did remember, his mind did recall, so he's mindful of what he's doing, but still do it. Then that person, he fall into sin for what he did, and then he has to go through the procedures regarding making up for what he did. Then I mentioned the case of al-jima', what is generally expected from a person regarding mal qada kafara, that he mentioned a person who fall into jima', that a person have to may have to do the expiation or a kafara, and it is based upon, as he mentioned, that tartib, that first in line, the person has to, if he's able to emancipate a person. Second, if he's unable, he go to the second task, which the person, he has to fast 2 consecutive months. So fasting 2 consecutive months. And that's when a person starts, he cannot stop except for a valid reason. If the person was to start and then he can somewhat decide not to continue, to take a break, optional take a break, then a person has to start the process once again. Then he mentioned that, so then the third is that the person, if he's unable to fast 2 consecutive months, then the person, then he feed 60 per person, 60 people. Then he mentioned, according to mention, la tajib, is not upon the woman that was involved, kafara. So the woman that was involved, that there's no kafara upon her. The ulama have a discussion regarding, was she a willing participant or she was forced. So if she was a willing participant, then the kafara is upon her because she willingly consent and participated. So both are guilty of the act. But if it's a case where she or the other party was forced, then there's nothing upon them there, nothing upon them regarding kafara, but they have to make up that day. Then I mentioned a person fall into nasi, jahil, mukra, that the person was somewhat forced into these things, or the person did so out of forgetfulness, then there's nothing upon them, Then he mentioned some other cases. Then he mentioned also regarding of those things regarding a suhoor, regarding the mandubat of a sawm, that a person tried to ensure that he delays his suhoor, or ensure that he have something to eat before fasting, and even just a mouthful of water or just a sip of water. Also that a person tried to be hasty in breaking off his fast. Then he discussed concerning a dua that he said, as we mentioned, as for the dua regarding what to be said in a person in breaking off his fast, that you have some discussion regarding those hadith, regarding the hadith, that some discussion regarding are they authentic or not. So there's a discussion regarding, although I said hadith, there's nothing that is authentic regarding what to be said. The person say whatever he wishes. So if those who take the view that a hadith regarding what to be said as a dua, specific dua in breaking of fast, those who say there's no authentic hadith, or the hadith is daif on that topic that I mentioned, you can say whatever you want in breaking off your fast. But at least the person certain, and the person breaking off, eat with the right hand, especially in these days that we eat together or break fast together or may share dinner with each other, that a person also become even mindful regarding adab al-akl wa shurb, that upon is mindful of the Islamic etiquettes when we eat, especially with others. And even by ourselves, we eat with our right hand, not with our left hand. We eat with our right hand and not with our left hand. We also drink with our right hand, not with our left hand. And also the person eating with others, that the person eat that which is in front of him. And if he wants to take from other things, then he should, from the other person's section, then he get the person, seek the person permission, seek the person's permission. And also the person, if that's the sahn, the plate, the person does his face in the middle of the plate. With me? So the person is eating the big plate with others, you don't be there, and the food dropping from your mouth into the plate. Then that's Allah Musta'an. That's, I can't imagine that.
You just happened to
That's not adi for me. But as a general rule, considered, that may consider, that's considered, people consider to be, that can go not well with some people. It goes well between eating by yourself, there's no problem, but eating with others, then that's a problem. Eating with others, then to be avoided completely. So I said generally, so those are the general things regarding eating together. And also, especially in these days, that he mentioned, then he went on after they mentioned that, he mentioned, وَيُنْدَبْ كَثْرَةَ الْجُودِ, that also things that are encouraged in the month of Ramadan. So of those things that we should pay attention to in the month of Ramadan while fasting, of those things that we should give attention, he mentioned being kind and helpful. So find that in the masajid, that at times that they may need people to, as I said, volunteers to help them regarding things in the masjid because of the use of the masjid that a person that's a volunteer of one time being helpful towards others in the masjid, then that's a time for the person somewhat to come forward and exercise al-jud, exercise concerning al-jud, that a person be helpful and volunteer in the masjid. And they mention Silat al-Rahim, also checking up on one family during the month of Ramadan, especially one of Muslim family, going over, having iftar together, inviting each other around, so with family members, kind of somewhat to, and also families going out for a salat, a tarawih, and salat in general in the masjid. So doing things with a family during Ramadan, especially regarding visiting of the masajid and breaking fast together. And sometimes, so the person that's not in Ramadan, that kind of somewhat try to allot some days, that kind of someone said, do it with your family. So do something with your family, that break fast together, have a meal together, try to do family suhoor in the morning. So doing things together with the family, iftar together, inviting the other family members over for a meal. So doing some stuff with the family during Ramadan. In according to the personal ability, they mention also Qira'atul Quran, that a person spend time with the Quran. So try to, Ramadan, try to have a portion that you can somewhat try to target reading each day. So have a portion which is the idea to complete the Quran at least once. So the idea, the objective is to try to complete the Quran at least once in the month of Ramadan. So I said that's the least. But so the person can somewhat try to target or have a hizb, a certain amount of that he will read each day during Ramadan. And also the person also put emphasis regarding attending Salat al-Tarawih, so then he can hear the Quran. So him reading, the person reading himself. And second, that a person also try to hear the Quran being read in the month of Ramadan, and that's attending Salat al-Tarawih from the start through to the end. Then I mentioned itikaf in general, that of those things that are encouraged in Ramadan, the person performing itikaf. Then you mention again some of these matters separately. As we said, itikaf is mentioned after as a separate topic regarding, as I mentioned, fasl fil itikaf. So I mentioned like a discussion regarding the ahkam of al-itikaf separately. This is just mentioned in general of those things that are encouraged in general. Then I mentioned more so in the last 10 nights of Ramadan. Then I mentioned the person also offering people things in Ramadan regarding things to break off their fast. So a person being generous, donating to the masajid or to those centers where the Muslim will gather to break off their fast. So it is encouraged that a person to know that according to a personal ability. So each person has to see that. And also in the sense of, if you go to the masjid to break fast, as they would say, go with something. If you go to the masjid and they have food or they're going to break fast, take something. So you know that they're going to have dates, take a little packet of dates. Also a little package of water, 6 or whatever. But also take something. Especially that masjid that you are a stranger to that masjid. You're not well known to that masjid, you're just passing by. So if you're visiting a masjid, but in general, at times, take something to the masjid, not just as they say, go empty-handed all the time to the masjid, with the intention of, I'm going there to fill my belly, to see what I can get, and never what I can give. So not, you understand, so try to undo that type of mindset. If you go to the masajid, sometimes take something, even something small to give to those people that are fasting, not to see time that's there to get my portion, and even if you cannot, then see you can volunteer to assist. Then if you cannot provide something, then see in what way you can volunteer to help put things together or to clean up. So find something that you can do to assist around the masjid. And also the masjid, they mentioned that also, he mentioned regarding that be mindful regarding concern of having children in the masjid, that people are there to the purpose of ibadah. So people come to the masjid, whether to break their fast, so they might be there early, before before Maghrib, whatever time before, they want to come, relax, read some Quran, until time to break their fast. He said, if you have children, just be mindful, people will be there trying to focus on their ibadah. So you understand? So if you have children, can somewhat be mindful that they're not disturbing, that they're not being monitored by you, the parent. or someone else that you are asked to supervise them. So if children are there, do not allow them just to, as they say, run wild while people are maybe praying, people may be trying to read the Quran, people trying to make a dua, people trying to get into some form of ibadah. So not to rob them of this opportunity. Not to disturb people while they're trying to worship their Lord. In those various months of Ramadan, just be more mindful of others trying to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not be the one to kind of somewhat infringe on people's ibadah. And also we said encourage the children coming at a certain age, so also they can participate in breaking off the fast and also involve in Taraweeh to some degree. So bringing the children so they can also be a part of it and have the experience, as they say today, to have experience as a form of their tarbiyah, learning that, Ramadan is that month, that so for them kind of somewhat to have an attachment to the month. So at times, if they're of that age that you can bring them, that to pray, to break iftar at the masjid, to be with others in the masjid, not per se just to come and be in the back playing and on their phones and game machines. And those things concerning as parents in the month of Ramadan, it's of any month, so to come put restrictions regarding their use of these things. As parents, especially in the month of Ramadan, for the child, that kind of somewhat, put some kind of somewhat, what's the other word? Not restrictions. Limits. Aywa, Jazakallah khair. That put limits regarding, regarding their use of these things in Ramadan. Especially concerning the time that they're in the masjid. If they're in the masjid, you understand, let them bring for them a book, an Islamic book, or if they can read the Quran, they read the Quran. So can someone say they are part of what's going on. That they are part of what's going on, not just said come just to just be there and not benefit themselves from the month of Ramadan. So that he mentioned all these things that he had mentioned regarding, and also things to avoid regarding al-ghiba, namima, kadhib, fuhsh, shahwa, and these things kind of somewhat stay away from, you understand, talk that is of no benefit. Allah mentioned qawl zur, of these forms of qawl zur. So that's what he mentioned, other things. So inshallah we stop at that moment, we stop here and continue tomorrow, and hopefully we can just complete the book binillahi ta'ala. Aywa.
Somebody wanted to ask, they have days to make up, you kind of alluded to it, but they have days to make up afterwards in the next month. Do they prioritize making up those missed days in Ramadan, or do they fast those days or so on?
So they have days to make up.
From that same Ramadan, this Ramadan, I'm going afterwards now. I didn't fast 4 days.
So the month of Ramadan, they will have days to make up.
Afterwards.
After, so they'll miss. For certain, they'll miss. You have certain people that will fall. There are days that they will miss in Ramadan. So those days to be made up. Yes, and the sooner the better. You understand? But the priority that they should not allow those days to spill over into the next Ramadan.
So we say to fast those weeks, we then do the sifs or shawal after.
Oh, you want to know about sifs? There's a different ahkam regarding the ulama, regarding the discussion. The Shaykh called the adhan, then concerning shawal, a little more. Discuss that discussion by itself.